There's a famous story about the first time that Benjamin Netanyahu met Bill Clinton after Netanyahu had been elected in 1996. And Netanyahu started lecturing Clinton about the Middle East and about Israel-Palestine, and then Netanyahu left the room. And according to Aaron Miller's book, Bill Clinton turns to his advisors and said, "Who the fuck does he think he is? Who's the fucking superpower here?" A similar version of this story shows up in Dennis Ross's book. I've been thinking about this line of Bill Clinton's, "Who's the fucking superpower here?" Because the United States is now in a truly bizarre situation in which Israel is prosecuting a war that is starving the people of Gaza to death. They're starving because very few trucks are getting through to provide the aid they need to live and the medicines they need to live. Now, this aid is not getting through because Israel has a very, very laborious inspection process that really reduces the number of trucks that can get through. Also because Israel is still bombing in places, which makes it hard for the trucks to travel safely with that aid. And because in the north of Gaza, where Israel has largely decapitated Hamas, there is total lawlessness. So it's not safe to deliver trucks. The trucks are getting stormed by starving people. We saw this tragically last week in this massacre that killed roughly 100 people. So you would think, and these policies are being carried out with America's deep participation, right? America is supplying Israel the weaponry that is using to prosecute this war, and America is protecting Israel at the United Nations and other international forums from the consequences of its policies, right? So the U.S. is deeply involved in these policies that are starving the people of Gaza to death. And you might think that because the Biden administration is now publicly saying it's very, very concerned about this famine that's taking place, that it would say, we will no longer participate in these policies that are starving people in Gaza to death. But that's not what the Biden administration is saying. The Biden administration is essentially saying, well, we can't do much about that, but here's this brilliant workaround. We'll drop the aid from the air, right? It's actually not such a brilliant workaround because according to humanitarian experts, it's very, very expensive and inefficient to deliver aid from the air. The aid can land very far away from where you want it to land. So let's say you have hospital supplies, they may not land near the hospital. Also, there have been suggestions that some of this aid may land in the sea, and it may be dangerous for Gazans to retreat, people in Gaza to retrieve it. The obvious answer is to stop the delivery of aid by land, and yet the Biden administration still is kind of essentially shrugging its shoulders or saying, pretty please, we'd really like you to let more of this aid in, as if the United States doesn't have any leverage here, right? It is with U.S. weapons that Israel is prosecuting this war. And indeed, the U.S. is probably violating its own law by participating in this starvation of Gaza, because under the Foreign Assistance Act, it's illegal for the U.S. to provide arms to countries that are committing grave human rights violations. And remember, the International Court of Justice has said that this could plausibly be a genocide. And it's also under the Foreign Assistance Act illegal for the U.S. to provide arms to countries that are impeding the delivery of U.S. humanitarian assistance, which Israel is also doing, right? So rather than complying with U.S. law and saying that America will not be complicit in these policies, the Biden administration shrugs its shoulders and says, well, we've got a creative workaround. Since we can't do anything about that, let's drop things from the air. And it's funny, there's a whole group of people in Washington who are really obsessed with this idea of credibility, right? Like America needs to look strong, right? So when Obama said that the use of chemical weapons in Syria was a red line, but then he didn't go to war, America lost credibility. When we pulled out of Afghanistan, we lost credibility. This was the argument made for Vietnam. Our credibility is on the line in Vietnam. You notice these credibility arguments are almost always made to start wars or continue wars, right? But this seems to me a very obvious case in which America's refusal to take actions to end the war actually seriously undermines our credibility. Because it's not just like the world is looking at this and saying, this is profoundly immoral to starve, that all these people are starving to death. But it also makes America look totally impotent, right? When America won't use the tools that are at our disposal to stop the war. It seems to me that Biden could say to Netanyahu, listen, you will not use any more American weaponry in this war, and we will not shield you from the consequences in international legal forum of this war, because we believe in international law. We want to hold Hamas accountable for its war crimes. And we want to hold Vladimir Putin accountable for his war crimes. And we can't credibly do that unless you also go through a process in which these things are adjudicated at places like the International Criminal Court and the International Court of Justice. And by the way, the US can say, we also care very passionately about the hostages. And we know the only way to save the lives of these remaining hostages is by ending the war and a ceasefire, because those hostages are also people in Gaza. So if you're starving Gaza and you're bombing Gaza, you are impairing the lives of the people in Gaza. And the only way to save their lives is by ending the war and having a ceasefire. And this, I think, would be the moral step for the US to take. And I think it would be in America's self-interest, but it would also just be an act of self-respect by the Biden administration. This Biden administration, which for weeks and months now has been basically tiptoeing around and telling reporters they're unhappy and saying, pretty please, we really hope that Netanyahu, this is not how Benjamin Netanyahu works. Really, are these people still so naive about this guy after all of those years since that meeting with Bill Clinton? This guy who in 2001 was caught on tape saying to Israeli settlers, America is something that can be moved easily. That's how Netanyahu thinks about American presidents. And you know what? The Biden administration is proving him right. As a matter of self-respect, if nothing else, the United States needs to say that it will not continue to be complicit in a war that it believes is morally wrong and that it believes will undermine, not improve, the safety and security of Israelis. And this dropping of the humanitarian from the air is a way of refusing to confront that fundamental need to assert America's self-respect.